So it's the first one is Professor Heather Hunt. She's at the University of Missouri. Second is Professor Ben Miller at the University of Rochester. And the third is Professor Joe Shaw at Montana State University. They've had many years of experience. I'll just stop there. In PhD admissions in both engineering and science. And yeah, I'm gonna end there and let them take it away. And we'll go in alphabetical order in terms of saying something about yourself that gives no preference to anyone. It's just alphabetical order. Okay. Okay. So all you. Heather?
Sorry. I was trying to look through whose last names were first. So I'm Heather Hunt. I'm a professor at the University of Missouri. I'm in the Department of Biomedical, Biological, and Chemical Engineering, and our name has changed so many times in the last 5 years, it's crazy to keep track of it. I'm also a faculty fellow for strategic initiatives in our Office of E-Learning at the University of Missouri System. And I have been, I was a director of undergraduate studies for several years. I also run our online graduate program. I've been on our graduate curriculum committee. Other things that may be of interest, I do research in biomaterials and a lot of engineering education research as well. So,
hi everybody, I'm Ben Miller. As Andrea said, I'm at the University of Rochester. To give you a little bit of a sense of where I came from in the process of applying to grad schools, I did my undergraduate work at Miami University in Ohio and applied to various places. I applied to Stanford University specifically because one of my professors told me I would not get in. So, of course, that's where I did my PhD. So say that by way of mentioning that you have to integrate all of the things that we're telling you on this workshop and then make the decision for yourself what you want to do. But did my PhD at Stanford, did a postdoc at Harvard, and I've been at the University of Rochester my whole career. I started in the chemistry department, and then I moved over to medical school, where I'm now a professor in the Department of Dermatology, but also biochemistry and biophysics, biomedical engineering, materials science, optics. I'm also part of the physics and chemistry graduate programs. I'm on the admissions committees for biophysics, biomedical engineering, material science, and have been in the past for chemistry, so I've seen kind of a range of things. My lab is split into two major areas. One, we do RNA-targeted drug discovery. The other part of my lab works on optical sensors, particularly using silicon photonics platforms.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. My name is Joe Shaw. I'm from Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana. That's a small town that's just north of Yellowstone National Park. We are a Carnegie Tier 1 research intensive university, and I'm a professor with a foot in really several places. My academic home is electrical engineering, but I also have a dual appointment in physics. And I run our optics program. I'm the director of our Optical Technology Center, which is an umbrella organization that takes in all the people across campus doing optics. And one of our primary things at the center is to help create jobs locally in the optics area. We've created or helped create 40 optics companies in a town of about 40,000 people, giving us one of the highest per capita concentration of optics companies. And I came from Alaska, and I did my PhD in Arizona, so cold and hot. And then my PhD was in optical sciences. I worked for 12 years at a federal research lab in Colorado, and then I came 19 years ago to Montana State University. My research field is the optical engineering and the development of optical remote sensing systems and applications ranging all over the place, from climate science, which is my sort of historical route, but now we're doing everything from military surveillance to river ecology and entomology. We touch many, many different fields. And I guess my summary statement to open with is that whether you're interested in academia or government or industry, PhD opens doors. That's the primary thing to do is to do a PhD if you want to open doors to new and exciting opportunities that you just simply would not have without it. So let's kick it off. So how are we going to do this? Are we going to take turns, Andrea?
So I kind of have mixed feelings. I had a couple questions designed for all of you, but then all of the participants have entered a lot of questions. So
Right.
I don't know if I should go with my questions or their questions. And I was kind of thinking I would go with their questions instead of my questions. Although I do want to ask one, since it is kind of related to a lot of the questions I answered earlier. How many of your schools still have the GRE as a requirement, and how many don't? Or how many are considering eliminating it if you still have it? So we'll start with Ben.
So for programs I'm involved in, it's about 50-50. I think it'll be 0 requiring the GRE as of next year, would be my guess.
Okay.
One thing I'll say is that if you have a good general GRE, we still will look at it, but it's definitely not required.
Heather?
So it's close to 50-50. So some of it is required. It's very program dependent across the university. I think fewer and fewer programs are requiring it going forward based on the research that it doesn't really map well with outcomes. So,
Joe?
Yeah, both the departments that I am heavily involved with do still require it, but there are certainly conversations going forward about whether we're going to continue requiring it. I can't say that I can predict whether that will happen or not, but I wouldn't be surprised if I saw it either reduce or go away. But right now, in the engineering side, we require the general test. On the physics side, they actually require the general and subject test, which is kind of historically the way things have been for a long time.
Right. Okay.
We're talking about it.
Right, yeah. I think so. That's kind of been what I've noticed is most schools are either talking about it or have moved forward and eliminated it. But I wanted to, since I have all three of you, I wanted to get a cross cycle. So, and we'll go back to Diana's question, seeing as it was the highest rated. So how do you think the upcoming recession and potential reduction in funding will affect the PhD admissions in the next cycle? We'll start with Joe.
I agree pretty much with what you said, Andrea. The last recession, 10-ish years ago, 12 years ago, I guess now, we saw a large uptick in applications to graduate school at both the master's and PhD level, but as you mentioned, also notably in the master's side. And so if that happens, that could make things a little more competitive for the applicants because you're competing with more people. But I also don't really anticipate any major changes in funding, partly because the next cycle is still involving funding that, at least for my group, I already have. And so, or that we're working on right now. There could be a change, of course. Like you said, it's very difficult to predict funding, but I don't anticipate there being a huge drop in admissions slots because of funding, but I do anticipate maybe an uptick, an increase of number of people applying.
So Heather?
So this is an interesting question. I agree that I think we'll see an uptick in number of applications. For us, looking at it as a state school, so we're in R1, very high as well, but we're very beholden to the state, and the state is going to have massive problems with collecting taxes this year. So our projected tax collection is going to be significantly less, which means funding rates are going to be lower from the state to the university itself, which will encourage the university to perhaps be willing to admit larger cohorts as long as they're still meeting our standards. especially at the master's level, because that actually provides a lot of funding into the university. But at the PhD level, again, that involves funding that we already have. So, everything's a balance between our grant funding as well as if we have an endowment that's specific to admitting students or supporting students. So that we might see an impact in terms of funding in a couple of years, but not necessarily this coming year.
So the only thing that I would add to that is I think it may cause a little bit of a shift in which programs are getting the most applicants. I can imagine that maybe a lot of more people want to become virologists after this. I don't know. Or maybe nobody wants to be virologists after this. We'll see. But that's the only other thing. Otherwise, I think in terms of the number of slots, it should remain about the same.
Okay. Great.
Hey, Andrea. There was a question I wanted to make sure that we got a chance to revisit. Can I jump in on that?
Yes, do. Please.
I love the question. I don't remember who asked it, and I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, but I just wrote a note to myself to revisit this. Somebody asked earlier if they are interested in working in industry, should they talk to their PhD advisor about it or potential PhD advisor about it, or is it a sensitive topic? That's a great question, because I know in some of the online forums that I've been participating in, I've been sort of shocked to learn how many. I always knew it was out there, but I'm being surprised at how often it's out there that people say that their PhD advisor is very anti-industry. And that's a real shame, as you might guess, given my role as directing a center whose primary job is to create industry and industry jobs. I'm all for it. And we have hired faculty very carefully, trying to make sure that they fit somewhere in that goal. And so I think the right answer there is, if you are not yet a PhD student and you are interested in industry, you should let that be a big factor in choosing where you go, and make sure that, do what Andrea said, look for evidence of the faculty members, PhD graduates. Where are they? Are they in industry? In that case, no worries. But if they're all academics and there's no industry connections or very few, I would let that be a cautionary sign. And you could always ask, you should always try to talk to the students in the group of who you're thinking of working with and ask them. And I think it's a shame when people are so fixated on academia that they won't recognize the options of working in other places. So, but it does exist, so you need to watch for that.
Yeah, and I think I would, in addition to that, I'd also say talk to your prospective advisor, because maybe it will turn the person off. But if you can't talk to your advisor about what your life goals are, regardless of whether it's industry or academia or policy or what have you, then that is not the advisor for you, because you need somebody who's going to be supportive of your career over the long term, not just in grad school.
Agreed.
So, a question from Sai. How does a gap of 1 or 2 years where I worked for the industry affect my PhD application? So why don't we start with Ben?
Awesome. You know how to work. I want to get people into my lab who know how to work. I think a year or two is fine, and some of our most successful students have done that. That doesn't mean that everyone has to do that sort of gap year, but certainly we view students who've gone out into the workplace and have a better sense of what goes on in the outside world very favorable.
Agreed.
Yeah, agree here. Nothing better.
How are extracurriculars and leadership positions outside of engineering weighed in admissions? What about leadership roles in engineering organizations?
Heather, you want to talk? I don't want to talk over you.
Yeah, yes, Heather, go.
Yeah, this is such a tough one, even for me personally. I think that as a student, as a researcher, as a PhD, as a contributing member of society, I like to see my students come out of graduate school to be well-rounded and thoughtful and good citizens. And so for me, seeing those things done intentionally, not in a I'm building my CV sort of way and checking boxes sort of way, but in I have chosen one or two things that I'm really passionate about and committed to, and I have a track record and a history of being involved in these organizations. I love to see that, because that says to me that you're thoughtful, you are involved in your community. It's about more than just you and your career, and that you are likely going to be able to stick with something over the long haul. But I completely understand some faculty who see those things as kind of distractions. So again, I have in biomedical engineering, we have a significant portion of our population that's headed to med school, and that's great. And a lot of our students have this plan, this strategy of like, I have to tick every box before I graduate. And that's not what I want to see. I want to see students who've been passionate about one or two things and they've done it really well. I don't want to see all the box ticks, because I don't know if that's real. I don't know if that's a valid experience for that particular student. So I like it if it's a real, valid, honest, valuable experience that you learn something from and has helped you grow as a person and as a professional.
I would echo that. I think it really helps us get a better picture of who you are as a person, because, even though we do want you to be productive in the lab, we don't want robots in the lab. We could buy a robot, but the personal passion is what I love, that word. That's what I'm looking for. Is if you're involved in some outreach or some activities because you're passionate about it, that's great. But I also am looking for evidence that you don't let it completely get in the way of getting something done.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So, does contacting an advisor consist of having a regular dialogue before applying, or more of a heads up to look for the application we submitted? Let's start with Ben.
So I think it's certainly worthwhile to contact an advisor before you apply. You'll find that in many cases you may not get a response because faculty get a lot of emails from folks. But even if they don't respond, at least they've learned your name. You'll have a better chance of getting a response if you refer to a specific thing that person has done. Like, I saw this paper of yours, here's why this is particularly interesting to me, here's why I'm particularly well prepared for your group, and ask a question about the research, rather than just saying, hey, I really want to come work for you, I'm a really good person. If you ask a question about the research, you're more likely to get a response and be able to engage in that dialogue. But also keep in mind that at most programs, you're admitted to the program, not to a specific lab. So advisors may be constrained in what they can say until you actually have an application in and get admitted to the program.
Yeah, ditto for us. I like hearing from students, but I will say that my first year as a new professor, I tried my best to respond to every single person because I was trying to be like really good and kind, and you just get so many of them, and so it's hard to stand out. So what I try to do now is, if I know that I don't have any openings for the coming year, I will reply to everyone I get with, I'm so sorry, but we don't have any open positions for the coming year. At least that is a solid no, and you know not to just to spend your time. But from a student perspective, yeah, I mean, if, like Ben said, do all the things that Ben said, and if you get a reply, great, hopefully that can start a dialogue, and if you don't get a reply, don't let it break your heart, because it may not have anything to do with you. So.
Yeah, I would echo that, but it's awfully hard to keep up on emails. I mean, we get so many hundreds of emails that it's hard, but it's still a good advice to try to attack. At the very least, you need to research who the faculty are in the programs that you're looking at and what they're doing. And like Andrea said earlier this morning, for those of you who were with us then, she reminded you to look for evidence of research activity, recent research activity, because if somebody has gone into a hibernation mode where they're either serving as a dean or they're in some other job that takes them out of the research mentoring role, that's not a valid mentor for you, probably. And so look to make sure that they're doing something interesting and try to engage them, especially if you have a legitimate question, like, I really am interested in these areas and you're doing this work that seems connected. Is that a valid connection? Or, some kind of question related to that, maybe. But the most important thing from my perspective is, in addition to trying to contact me personally, that personal statement, or whatever it's called in your graduate application, that personal statement is the key piece that you need to make sure you craft carefully. You need to mention, at least in my world, you need to mention specific faculty who are doing things that you want to do or that you think you would like to do. And you need to tell us something about yourself and your background to let us know why that is a connection or an interest of yours. Sometimes we get these personal statements that are much more, when I was 3 years old, I couldn't wait to go to engineering. Great, but that's not going to help as much as knowing that you are in engineering school or a PhD or a physics school and you want to come to a PhD because of the following reasons. Let us know what your goals are. Let us know what your dreams are. Let us know what kind of work you want to do. And probably don't restrict yourself just to my lab. You need to mention some of my colleagues who are doing interesting things. Because then, as I forget already who said it, but I think Ben said it, that you are admitted fundamentally to a program or a department, but still you need to have a connection. So you need to have the connection, but if you rely on only me, then you're just restricting your options. So you need to open it up a little bit. That kind of goes back to what Andrea talked about this morning about whether you go to a place knowing right from day one that you're going to work with Professor X or whether you go in on a rotation or something. There are pros and cons to that, but either way, you need to mention all the people with whom you could work that you would be interested in.
So on that note, what do you want to see in a personal statement?
Actually, if I can jump in on that just to amplify what Joe just said, if we get a personal statement that's not specifically tailored for us, meaning that it talks about why the person wants to go to University of Rochester, who the faculty are that they're interested in, and why, then it's a definite no for us. So the personal statement really has to be focused on why they want to come to UR and what faculty they're interested in.
So to clarify, it's a no if they don't have that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So that's absolutely required that we have that in the personal statement. And so we want to see that. We want to see an ability to discuss the specific research that they've done intelligently.
I agree with that. I will say that in preparing for this, and of course I advise students every year when they're applying to graduate school as well as applying for graduate fellowships through the NSF GRFP, for instance. I review every year on those panels. And it is interesting comparing like what I tell students now, having been on panels and having been on the review committees, to what I did when I submitted my applications. So I applied to, just so everybody knows, my background is I did my undergrad at Iowa State in chemical engineering, and then I went to Caltech for graduate school. And when I did my review of looking at my own materials, I would recommend no one ever do what I did. I swear I did all the wrong things and did all the cliches, and I'm just happy that they saw the potential and the value of what I had done there. But I echo that personal statement, the things that I don't like to see, I don't necessarily need to see a quote from someone famous, and I don't necessarily need to hear about like this impactful experience that you had with a K-12 teacher. I mean, I do love to hear stories about that. That helps set a personal connection, but it has to be genuine. So I come back to the personal statement of this genuine story of of what are you trying to do with your life? Where is your career going? What problem are you trying to solve? And what I'm looking for in a personal statement is not that the student knows what they want to do necessarily, but they have thought about it. So it may change, but right now, what they want to do is they want to solve this big, grand problem. And in order to solve this big, grand problem, they need to get more experience and more research and more classes in field A. And this is what they've done to get there so far. And it could be a very meandering path because maybe they didn't know that when they started on this path. Maybe they've changed their minds. But I want to see how the story has unfolded, how all of those experiences have added up and directed the student to where they are. So it shouldn't be disconnected. It shouldn't be disjointed. It should be like your PhD dissertation, right? It should have a central theme. It should have a, where am I going with this? What do I want to be? And who do I want to be? And how do I want to do it? So I tend to look for those personal statements more as someone who has put some thought into who they are and who they want to be and where they want to go and how they want to get there. Because that says to me that you might actually be able to do that with a full research project as well and preparing to frame your dissertation.
But I think it's really, just to add, I think it's really important that it ends with, you're trying to get X, and in order to get to your end goal, you need to go to, in your case, University of Missouri.
Yes, exactly. Specific professors.
Yes. Yeah. It has to be anchored in that.
Right. That last paragraph should clearly say, this university, these professors, this is why, this is the type of research they do. And if it doesn't end like that, I'm going to be like, okay, I don't know what you want me to do with this.
Yeah, but it has to end with that.
Yes, agreed.
Super important.
And, something that you said, Heather, that I want to follow up on is you said the student doesn't need to know completely what they want to do. That's okay.
Yeah.
I didn't. When I came out of undergrad school, I was really excited about some things. But it was some things, plural. And I didn't know yet what I really wanted to do. And so I even remember getting a call from one of my graduate schools that I had applied to asking me, well, we're looking at your application and you seem to be interested in this and that, and we have people sitting here at the table in this and that. Which do you want to do? And, I was kind of stumped. I was like, well, I don't know. But all I could do was talk about what I liked about this and what I liked about that. And then they chose. It's like, well, we have an opportunity here. We're going to offer you that. And that's okay, I think. If you know that you're interested in one thing, talk about it. But if you're interested in two things and you really like them, and even if you can't see how they would connect, we might see how they connect. And so tell us if you're interested in optical sensing and signal processing, because those connect.
And I think the other thing that's really important is that for all the students who are listening, you heard us all give our intros, and Ben and Joe and I, we said, we do all of these things, and none of us do one thing. I also have an appointment in dermatology as well. That's totally unexpected, but life and research takes you on many pathways, and so I want you to have at least thought about what you want and how you're going to get there. But it's okay. Even as professors, we end up doing a lot of different things.
Definitely.
So kind of continuing this personal statement, it's very hard to write personal statements for every school we apply to. How do we navigate this? So, basically, you're saying that, a unique personal statement needs to be written for every school. How true is that claim? And I know the answer to this, but I'm just gonna ask you.
I know the answer, but I'll let you present wrong answers.
And then I'm grading you.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. So I think we really said it in the last discussion, in that it really comes down to that anchor paragraph, because most of your personal statement could be the same for all of the institutions, but you just need to have that section that specifically talks about the fact that the way you're going to achieve your goals is at the institution you're applying to with a particular set of faculty, and provide details about why.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted somebody to clearly state that. Okay. Yes, exactly. Correct answer. You get
All right.
A. Okay. How will having a lot of research experience as an undergrad but no publications be received or perceived?
So this is an interesting question because I think it also has a backdrop of what else is going on in your life. So I would say that when I review for the GRFP as well as I review for people coming in, I'm looking at applications holistically, right? So I'll give an example from me. I was very fortunate in my undergrad to have a full ride. So undergrad, I didn't have to work. So I did research during the summer. I also worked for some companies, did some internships and co-ops. So I got a whole bunch of different experience. Because I did all of those things, I had some research, but not a ton, but I had worked in industry. But that's a different situation for me. I was able to maintain a 4.0, and that's a different situation than many of my current students who over half of our students are working at least 20 hours a week during an academic term. And so that if they're having to work to pay for their college, that immediately puts them in a different position in terms of how much time they have. And so as a reviewer, I look at the application as a whole and think about what are all of the other things that are going on in that student's life. So if a student has a lot of research experience, but maybe doesn't have publications, that could be because they were trying to find the right fit. Like they may have done a lot of different types of research until they were finding the one that works for them. And so, of course, if you're only doing 12-week stints or a semester at a time, you wouldn't necessarily have a publication. And that would be okay as long as it got you to a point of understanding what you really wanted to do. But if you were a student like me who had a full ride, had a great GPA, had nothing really else going on in their lives, and you were just doing research for 3 years in a lab and you didn't come out with a publication, that might send up some warning flags to me where I might dig deeper into your rec letters and stuff just to see what else was going on. But personally, I try to review all of that holistically.
I would just add briefly that you should try very hard to think about and then summarize what you have learned from this research experience. I think it's actually relatively rare for undergrads to come out with a lot of publications.
It is.
I've had one undergrad student that came from my lab that had a first author journal paper. Most of them are tacked on as a number 5 author or something because they helped on a project, but they all learn valuable things. That's what you need to do, is really emphasize that. I hope I didn't undersell the importance of publication. Because if you have them, that's great. If you don't, that's not a showstopper at all.
Right. And I completely agree with that. I mean, really what we're looking for is, what did you get out of it? What are your skills? And again, like there's a difference between reviewing for the GRFP and just reviewing general graduate applications. The big fellowship awards tend to have more students that have more presentations, might have more nth authorships, things like that. But yeah, I want to know what your skills. What did you learn from this?
But having presentations and things like that, conference things, that is important, I think, to try to get involved that way.
I agree.
Yeah, that was the one additional thing that I was going to mention is if you do have an opportunity to present a poster or even a talk someplace, that can be a great thing to have.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing to keep in mind is publications can take like 6 months to a year just through the review process. So having a publication really means that you submitted something during your sophomore, maybe junior year,
right?
Which is like really early. On the other hand, having a presentation could be done a little later.
Yeah.
So, because it could be accepted for giving a presentation and you could have submitted it like the summer right before your senior year. So you almost have like a whole additional year to get work done. So I would say presentations are a lot more common than publications. Okay, so there are two key questions I want to make sure we touch on. And they just came in, and they're at the bottom. Should we mention the specifics of our projects in our personal statements or just touch over all of them? In other words, I think the question really is, should it be almost like an explanation of the details of the projects, or should the personal statement kind of briefly give it, 30,000-foot overview?
I would probably go for the 30,000-foot overview as long as there's enough information there for the person reading the document to really know what it is that you did and be able to get the sense that you understand what you did. People reviewing applications are not going to have enough time to read through multi-page papers, typically, so you don't need to go to that level of detail, but making sure that they really understand that you understood what you were doing and contributed to it in a meaningful way is important.
I would say a quick one-sentence summary of what you learned from each one would be a really important thing. Sorry, Heather.
No, it's fine. And I would say that I tend to encourage my students to, at least in that 30,000-foot view, list off the context and the need. Like, what is the context of the problem you're trying to solve, and what is the actual problem you're trying to solve? I see too many students do this really deep dive into, like, this itty-bitty thing with long words and multiple complicated sentences. And I just need to know, like, I'm trying to cure this type of cancer because it kills people. Like, I mean, slightly more detailed than that. But then at the end of each one, if you can tell me, like, what skills, like, what you've learned out of it. So do you know how to use these specific types of instruments? Do you know these protocols? Do you know these handling techniques? Like, if I can get a list of that, that really helps me orient, like, what types of research you would be qualified to do.
So kind of on that same note, can we mention multiple faculty with whom our research interests match with on a personal statement? You know, effectively, do you need to put all your eggs in one basket?
I think we already talked about that, and at least my opinion I expressed is that go ahead and list all of them that you think you have a connection to. Just make it clear what's that connection and why.
Yeah, multiple is better than a single person.
Yeah.
You know, I just want to make sure we get that answered. Do you think
we have good questions here, and so I'm glad you're going through them.
Yeah. Do you think age, old, for example, 30 plus at time of PhD application is a disadvantage? Does it indicate indecisiveness?
No, it can just indicate a different life experience that can be really valuable. It's actually funny. Right now, in my group, I have 3 people who came back to the PhD over 30. And 2 of them one worked in industry, one worked as a technician in a lab at an academic institution, and one was in the military. And they bring a background that is really valuable to the group. They were really had to work to get them here because they were sought after on applications. So I think that can be great.
And I agree. I mean, I was 30 when I started my PhD, and so I felt unusual, but actually the program I went to, there were lots of people that came in from industry and government research labs. So once I got there, I found out that I was not that much older than the people I was studying with. There's many paths to get to a PhD, and as long as you have learned something and can tell us the story of what you've learned and therefore why the PhD now, that's great. And that experience can be a big plus.
So I just to follow up on that, Joe, what do you think the pros and cons are of waiting?
Well, I had a master's degree, and then I went to work at a federal research lab, and my master's advisor told me if you do that, you'll never go back for a PhD because you won't want to give up your salary. Well, I was fortunate I didn't have to. My employer sent me on a fellowship. But, you know, that's the risk, is if you go to work and you get a real job and you get a mortgage and a family, it can be hard to go back to grad school. But if you do it, I would say make that gap fairly short, you know, a couple years, if you're planning on doing it, make it a short one. If you just happen to have waited 8 years because you were out in a job and now you decide that the real way that you want to go forward in life is with a PhD, just tell us that story and make sure that we understand what brought you to that conclusion. So, yeah, the pros and cons. The pro is the experience, the professional and life experience. The con is you can forget stuff from undergrad school. And so that can be a real problem coming in, taking a qualifying exam or something. But, you know, it can be dealt with, but that is a con. Another con would be just if you run into people who happen to think that that's a bad thing to do. There are people out there that just don't think that you should be a PhD student in your 30s. And oh, well, if you run into them, I hope you find somebody else too.
So there was actually one question in here about, and I can't find it now, but it was something about the, like, effectively, why get a PhD, right? Like, if you already have a master's degree, how does getting a PhD help your career? So you chose to get a PhD after having a master's degree. So what motivated you, other than your company paying for it, which would be a big motivator?
I wanted specifically to take a leadership role at a research lab where I worked and not just be the guy that was employed on somebody else's project. I was having a ball doing the research, but I looked around and I said, yeah, I want to be the guy asking the questions and writing the papers, and I just liked what I saw my PhD colleagues doing, and I pretty much knew that coming out of my master's program, but my financial situation and life situation sort of encouraged me to choose the other way, and I'm really glad the way I did it.
Okay. I'm sorry, Heather. I got distracted. So getting back to that, being a slightly older PhD student question.
I mean, I've had PhD students who are older than me right now, and it doesn't matter to me as long as you come into my group and you're willing to be a good student and a good employee and a good researcher. A lot of times the students are more mature, they're more thoughtful, they've often had industry experience, so they know what it's like to work in that environment. They bring a professionalism to lab that can be really helpful to my other students who haven't had industry experience. So realistically, like, the age thing doesn't bother me. It shouldn't bother anyone, because really, if you're coming into it for the right reasons, that should be all that matters. And if it bothers someone that you're going to be working with, then that's their problem and not yours, and maybe don't work with them.
Yep.
So we're kind of hitting probably the last couple questions, but I think this is a really important one. Will admissions be understanding of the challenges upcoming students are facing during this time? It has made it difficult to find relevant job openings, do research, and even learn. And I think this is particularly important this summer when a lot of REU sites are either closing or canceling, like NIH canceled all of its summer REU programs. So kind of in this context.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Heather.
I was just going to say that if you're applying to a university and they're not willing to take that into account, is that really the one university that you want to be affiliated with?
Yeah, I think everybody is going to be in the same boat. So I think universities will have to take that into account. In terms of, the expertise you're getting, I probably would not put down master of Zoom control because everyone will also have that expertise. But I think we will all have to take into account the odd times we're living through.
It might help if you've been accepted to an REU program that has to cancel. Put that on your application that you were accepted and were excited about doing an REU, but the COVID situation made it so you could not. We will understand.
Yep.
Yeah, and I will say too, because I actually run an REU site. Our campus canceled all of our REU sites, and they said we're not running them, we're not providing any support around them, and I understand why. So for us, when we emailed the students who have been accepted, we did two things. We said your position is held for next summer, so if you still want to join us next summer, you're automatically in. And then we gave please still put this on your resume and your CV, and here's the blurb that you could use to do that. But I will say that from an advisor perspective, an REU is 8 to 10 weeks. It can be really valuable. I 100% understand that because I run an REU site. But at the end of the day, if you come to me and you only have one summer research experience as opposed to 2, that means that maybe I'll have 8 to 10 or 12 weeks of extra training I'll have to do for you. And in the process of a 5-year PhD, that's a blip. And I'm willing to put forward that extra work to get you where you need to be, because I'm looking at you not in terms of just a worker bee in lab. I'm looking at you in terms of potential and what you can learn and how you can grow. And so I'm going to take that into account and be like, cool, I just need to do a little bit of extra training, and that's an okay thing.
So I want to make sure. By the way, one of our next panelists just said that they want to do a PhD with you, Heather. privately, and I'm now probably going to get in trouble, but anyway, just thought I'd toss that out at you. Okay. If I would like to do research with a certain professor, can I send an email to contact him directly? Is there any other approach?
Don't stalk them. That's a little creepy. Oh, there's nothing wrong with an email. Please don't call us. Don't call us. Send us an email. That's much better.
Yeah, I agree. Email is just fine. We talked about this earlier. Keep in mind that we get a lot of emails, so try to make it short and to the point.
One thing I would say, turning the question a little different direction, is once you do get into a program, absolutely contact faculty that you're interested in. Although they'll probably be contacting you at that point. But certainly once you are admitted into a graduate program, it's a good practice to begin contacting faculty that you're interested in. You may find that they'll say, yeah, that's great. Why don't you come and start your degree a little bit early and get some experience in the lab before the semester starts, which can be a terrific way to get a jump start on your program. So I would definitely use that.
Andrea, could I make a quick comment? One of these people has asked a question. If we apply for the GRFP, which is a Graduate Research Fellowship, as a senior in undergrad, how do we navigate writing the research proposal, especially if our current research advisor's work isn't a complete overlap? In one case, I had an undergrad student working with me, and she did a great job, but she wanted to go a slightly different direction in graduate school. She had picked out a faculty member at a specific university that she wanted to work for. She contacted her and actually said, I want to apply for a graduate research fellowship, and I would like to do it in your lab. And they worked together, and then I worked with her sort of in the background to help, just general advice about how to write a good proposal. So I don't think that's the only time that's happened. It can be done.
Yeah, and I would say that at least in the panels that I have been on, reviewers value it much more highly if it's not related to your undergraduate work, because it's really easy if you're in a group and you're writing a proposal on the basis of the research that you're currently doing or the research that your group currently does. It's really hard for us to differentiate, did you write that or did your advisor write that? How much help did you get? So for me, it's always valuable when I see a student say, like, take a stab at a project that you have some background in, but is like over here, because you can clearly tell that they did it themselves and they thought through, and they still might have had help and probably did have some advisement on that. But like, I value it more when a student actually does it on something different, because that shows a difference in thought.
So there are two kind of questions that I want to make sure we get to. So what are the factors that I should consider while ranking schools? Which is a trustable source to get information on that specifically, and to the areas of the department and research? Yeah, so I'll let Ben lead this off. And I'm also going to let the next panel talk about this as well. So you get a faculty perspective as well as a recent graduate perspective. So just so you know, your answers will be compared.
Okay, so to me, the rankings are largely meaningless. I think within a certain group, whether something is number 5 or number 25 really doesn't matter. What you want to look at is where are students from that particular program going? Do they get high-quality postdocs and jobs? And you also want to do the same thing for the faculty members that you're interested in. See where the faculty members, are they publishing? Are they publishing in good journals? Do their students go on and get excellent postdocs and jobs? And to me, that's much more important than ranking. Now, certainly, if something is has a PhD program but is not really a Research One institution, that's probably something to avoid. But otherwise, I wouldn't pay too much attention to rankings.
I had just the worst decision when I was looking at graduate school acceptances. So I was able to, I was admitted to both Caltech and MIT, and I just like spun for weeks, and I went to visit both of them, and I just spun and I spun and I spun, and I finally made like a pros and cons list of each one, and it was, and I will say it was a real struggle for me to decide, but what ended up helping was exactly what Ben said. I looked at the outcomes of what I wanted. I knew at that time that I really wanted to go into academia. I wanted a faculty position, and of the two, Caltech had much better statistics, a much higher percent of their PhDs went on into academia, and then that's when I accepted into Caltech. And then when I was looking at faculty, I did the exact same thing. So I looked at which research groups of the ones that I was really interested in had a large portion of their people go into academia. And again, if you're looking at industry, you should be looking at people going into industry. And I was, really fortunate from that experience to get a great postdoc position. So
I mean, just a fabulous advisor.
it was, I know, my postdoc advisor was like amazing, so amazing.
Yeah, it's great. So Joe?
I agree. It's I hear all the time about people looking at different ranking sources, and when I look into it, it seems like those rankings are more tied to football teams than actually anything I care about. So, not to put too blunt a point on it, but I would do completely what Ben said, which is to look at people. You are fundamentally working. You are applying for a job with a faculty member, and if a department only has one person who you're interested in, that's okay, but just be aware that there's only one person. But you need to look at where they're publishing and where their students are going. And if you interview at a school, either remotely or in person, you should be asking those questions. You should ask them where their students are going, because that might be, as Heather said, the deciding factor for you. There's lots of really, really outstanding programs that are not as high in somebody's rankings that are doing world-class work in a given area.
So moving on, can I use professional letters of recommendation to apply to a PhD program instead of academics? Some programs specify, but others do not. So we'll start with Joe.
You want to have a connection to your academic background, without a doubt. Your ideal would be to have at least one letter that is kind of like Andrea said earlier, kind of an anchor letter that comes from somebody who knows, especially if you did undergraduate research with somebody. But if you've been out working for 5 or 10 years, maybe that becomes not so relevant, and now it's really all about what you're doing at your employment place. And if you're succeeding working for a company, it's like Ben said earlier, it's very likely that you are going to be successful as a grad student also, because it's not that different. We want to know that you have good work ethic and good ability to work in a group. The closer your work is that you've been doing to research, the better, but it's not necessary. So I would say a mixture of letters is your best bet if you come from a mixed background. Otherwise, and even if you are an undergrad student right now, a mixture of letters would be okay, but don't give us letters from your grandmother or your pastor. We want letters from people who can evaluate you as an employee in a research group.
Ben?
Yeah, so the one thing I would add to that, to me, the most critical thing in the letters is not so much where they come from, it's do the people writing the letters really know you? That is, I don't want to see an academic letter that's, Bob was in my second year calc class 3 years ago. He got middle to grade, that sort of form letter stuff. I want someone that can provide me something that's really individualized for you, that tells me about you and why they think you're a good candidate. So that, to me, is really the critical thing.
Agreed.
Okay. So this may be our last question. How late should a candidate wait before accepting an admissions offer? I'm waiting for the decision from my first choice university, but they've not said anything yet. But I've received offers from some other very good schools. What should I do?
If the other school is us, you should decide right now. But otherwise, if that's your first choice, everyone else will wait.
I was going to say, if the other school is us, you should also decide right now.
I'm gonna say you should always make the right choice for you. And so the one thing to do is you could contact the admissions officer at your first choice and just check in and say, could you please tell me what the status of my application is? I've been accepted to other universities, and I just wanted to know, will it be 2 weeks that I need to wait on, or 3 weeks? And then if they give you a time that you're on the wait list, you may not hear for another month. You can go back to your universities that have been accepted and say, can I give you a response by X date? And they may say no, and you may have to make a hard decision. And the thing is, that happens with jobs all the time. So make the best decision that you can with the information that you have at the time.
That's a much better and useful answer.
Yeah.
That's good. A lot of programs use April 15th as kind of the official response date. And so if you haven't heard by now, it's April 8th, it's unlikely that you're going to be admitted to that program. But I would just ditto what Heather said. If that's where you really want to go, sure, contact them and look into it. But you're running out of time to make that decision. So you might have to just make the best decision for you with the information you have.
So no more questions have come in. I want to just scroll through all of these and make sure that I haven't missed anything that's super relevant. Oh, so we talked briefly about contacting advisors that we're interested in. If you had to describe your ideal letter to you, not in general, but the ideal letter that a student would send you, what would it look like? Because there are several questions in here about, when should we begin contacting advisors? What should be in the letter? What should be contained in the letter? So, Ben, what would that, or Heather, go first. What would that, Ben, you're on the spotlight.
Yes, so for me, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I want to know, number one, why you're particularly interested in my group, and that needs to be more than just copying and pasting from my web page, which is 10 years out of date anyhow. So you need to have something specific that I'm doing now that is driving you to want to contact me. I also want to know a little bit of background about why you think you're a good fit for my research. But none of this needs to be really long. I'm not going to read an enormously long email. It can be done in a couple of paragraphs. And then there needs to be some action that you're asking for, whether it's follow-up to discuss research in more detail, that is, or a specific question about my research. Actually, when people contact me and ask a specific question about a paper they've read, that's the most likely to get a response from me. If they contact me and say, do you think I'd be a good candidate for your group? I've applied to your institution. I'm most likely to either not write back or write back and say, you need to apply, and then we'll talk.
I'm going to be really facetious in my answer here, so take it as partially a joke. An ideal letter comes in from a candidate who has already applied to my university and starts the email with, I currently am funded through a fellowship from X Institute. Goes on to describe everything that Ben already said, but then says, why in particular it's a must that I work for your group, because that will get my attention. I don't need to have my ego stroked by any means, but I like to hear things I want to know that you have put forth effort on your own behalf. I guess that's what I want to see. Like, I want to mentor graduate students who are willing to work and are willing to be independent, and then are willing to be guided when their independence maybe takes them off the rails a little bit. But I want to see that they've put forth effort on their own behalf, and they're not just like making me do all the work for them.
So there's one last question that's been asked twice now. Would you choose a student who had fewer opportunities but did as much as possible despite the odds, or a student who is technically more qualified for your lab? And I'm assuming by that last part, like someone who did research in exactly what you do. So Heather, go first because you kind of briefly touched on this a little bit.
Yeah, I'd rather see someone who had more difficulties and stuff and how to deal with them, because that says to me that they have learned how to cope with challenges, and they've learned how to address them, and they've learned how to move beyond them, and that's a really important skill in a PhD in a research setting. So I very much value that.
Yeah, I think both have their role, but your job as a student who is applying from that kind of background is to make it clear to us that that's your background. Just paint us a brief picture about where you're coming from and why you didn't have more opportunities to do this or that or the other. But more important than that is to highlight what you have done, because everybody's done something that can be used to tell us that you know how to learn, you know how to work, and you're a good person.
Yeah, and I would say that in addition to that, you don't want to dwell on or focus on the fact that you've had a tough circumstance or limited opportunities, even if that's the case. The most compelling personal statement that I ever read, the person just set out, here were the difficulties, and then went on to, but here's what I have done. Right?
Exactly.
And that really, that juxtaposition of, there were these difficulties, never mind, here's what I've done, was really powerful.
Okay, so on that note, we've officially run into the next session. So I was worried we weren't going to have enough questions. Clearly that didn't happen. So thank you, Joe, Ben, and Heather. I really appreciate your time this morning, and I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon. Obviously, if you want to stay on, you're more than welcome to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Good luck to all of you who are participating.
Yeah.